Good evening, afternoon, friends. My name is Ryan Johnson. I use the he, him pronouns. My friends also use the term bruh or bro. I am the grandson of Barbara Jackson. I am the son of Dr. Vanessa Jackson. I'm coming live from my bedroom. I'm here. We are at home. I hope you all are staying safe. I am the co-founder and artistic director of Soul Define, the DC's premier tap company that is in residence at Dance Place. I am a scholar, arts activist, and performing artist. Now, we are reflecting on the violence against Black bodies that has taken place both recently and historically in this country, as well as the embedded white supremacy in our dance community. In alignment with our mission, it is essential for us to be visible and vocal with the community at this time. As we begin, I want to take a moment of silence to honor and acknowledge those Black lives, known and unknown, that have been assassinated by police brutality and hate. Thank you so much. To our friends that are watching, please let us know where you're watching from. Drop your city or state dance affiliation in the chat so we know who's joining us. Now, Soul Defined, we welcome you to this solution-oriented conversation from what is known as the Washington, D.C. region, which is occupied unceded territory, the ancestral homeland of the Powhatan, Pamunkey, and Piscataway peoples, and many more whose histories have been erased. We acknowledge that the foundation of this country was funded by the sale of enslaved Africans and built by their forced labor. We welcome your voice, your questions, and your energies to the conversation. You can leave your comments or questions for the panelists in the chat as you watch, and we will circle back towards the end to address them. Now, I have to say thank you to TRJ Bridges for providing ASL interpretations tonight. We have Tiffany and Cindy with us, who will be holding it down for ASL interpretations. Now, let's get this party started. I am so elated to introduce the moderator for this evening. She is a powerful woman who is doing amazing things, not only in the art sector, but also in other sectors as well. I'm happy to know her and call her a friend. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you TJ.
Hello, everyone. I am TJ Alladin. Super happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Ryan. My pronouns are she and her. I know that I'm supposed to say what I'm wearing for folks that can't see me. I'm wearing a sleeveless collared shirt that I borrowed from my mother 4 years ago and never returned. Thank you, Mom. My hair is purple, but it looks a little bit, plum in this, and it's about, cheekbone length. I am from Brooklyn, New York originally. I'm currently in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my culture is from Guyana. And that's sort of where my dance history starts. My first dancing experiences were reggae music with the family. I branched out on my own and decided I wanted to study gram technique. And then for my master's, I studied contemporary dance. I now work in the arts field for iPlay, which is a global organization that focuses on touring, performing arts work for young people around the world. And I'm super excited to share that Ryan and Soul Defined are actually going to be a part of our 2021 showcase. And now I'm going to pass it on to the rest of the panel, who I'm so excited to have you all meet. They're all amazing women. And we're going to start with Allison.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alison McNeil. I'm so excited to be here. I was born in DC, raised in Maryland. Actually started out as a performing artist, and probably about 15 years ago decided to work behind the scenes. These days, a lot of my work is around capacity building and organizational development, helping organizations think through how to achieve their goals, whether or not they are achieving their goals, and what might be getting in the way, the blind spots. My pronouns are she and her. I'm really excited to be here. I have on a pink top and my braids are to the side. And I have some flowers behind me and circles behind me, lots of colorful energy. I love to bring thoughtfulness to the space that I exist in, oftentimes listening, but regularly creating thought-provoking conversation. I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much, TJ.
Thank you, Allison. And next up, I believe we have Caronda.
Well, howdy, everyone. I'm Caronda Baker. And I use the She series or sis for this conversation today because I'm among family. I'm a philanthro activist, and I'm joining you from my family's home in what we call unincorporated Maddoxville in rural Georgia. And that's on the lands of the East Cherokee, the Creek, and Muskogee nations. I'm a light-skinned African-American woman sitting in front of some white windows with a beige window seat. I'm wearing a denim jacket, mauve dress, rocking a curly, kinky, dark brown fro, and leather and metal earrings. My work is focused on institutional giving, fundraising, and philanthropy. So that's the lens that I'm going to bring to this convo today, and it's a pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you so much, Caronda. Next up, we have Jane.
Hey, everybody. My name's Jane Rabinovitz. I use the she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with short brown hair. Today, I'm wearing a black blouse with white stripes, sitting in front of a beige wall. I come to you today from Arlington, Virginia, on Accomack land, just across the river from Ryan and Soul Defined in DC. I'm a DC native. I was born and raised here in Northern Virginia. I dance locally with a few different companies in DC, but by day I work at the Kennedy Center in the dance programming office. So I do a lot of curation work and event producing and presenting for the Kennedy Center. And I'm just really honored to be included in the conversation today.
Thank you, Jane. And last but not least, Nicole, where are you? Yay.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Nicole De Weever, she, her pronouns. I am here representing the island of St. Martin and Art Saves Lives Foundation. I'm very excited to be a part of this panel, and I live in Harlem, New York.
Excellent. Thank you all for being here with me. I'm just going to jump right in to my first question, which is about Decolonizing Dance, which is the title of this webinar. I had a conversation a while back with my dad about the difference between defunding and unfunding. A slight change in prefix, but to me a very different meaning, especially when I think about decolonizing dance. So for you all, can you share what is the difference to you in decolonizing and uncolonizing? Note, uncolonizing is not actually a word, but it does signal something slightly different than decolonizing. So I don't know who I want to put first. Maybe you can start it off.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So I was thinking about that, and what I landed on was that I want to, in the future, work in uncolonized space. Like I want to move into a place where my interactions, where conversations with funders, conversations about being in partnership, about how we resource activities, and everything is from an uncolonized standpoint. And by that I mean it's from a place where like colonization didn't even affect it. Like it isn't there. However, I do think that as we build new things in an uncolonized way, there is an active amount of decolonizing and deconstructing and dismantling that has to happen. So I really see them as happening in parallel and simultaneously because we know better. So we know better and we have to do better and create uncolonized spaces. But we still have work to do with a lot of the structures and the rubrics and the systems that already exist to actually break them down. And even to potentially move from decolonization to like abolition. So like if decolonization doesn't work, then we need to go one step further and just abolish it altogether. So I'm going to pause there and kick it off for anyone else who has anything else to share.
I would like to say that decolonization is important to me because it allows us to become empowered by reclaiming our cultural identity through the arts, through socially, politically, economically. And as we like assume leadership positions, I feel like within the cultural and the educational institutions, I feel like it gives us and allows us to regain power, influence, and control our own stories. And that's why, to me, it's so important, especially in a historical context. With the work that I do with my organization with children, I really try to make sure that the historical context is about, taking ownership and making sure that the way that we're portrayed is at the forefront, and that they understand not only that within obviously the dance, as we're talking about dance, that they're learning the dances, but they're learning the history and starting to kind of romanticize on their own history and tradition instead of outside of it. So I think decolonization is a very important part of the work that I do, and is very important, especially in terms of the conversation we have now. It's very relevant to the time, and it's time to get it moving. Get it moving. So
thank you. Other thoughts on that question?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, a lot of the work I do is dealing with classical ballet as a genre. And I was thinking about how, for me, let's think about story ballets for a second. Decolonizing, there's a lot of work and discussions right now talking about the classic canon, like La Bayadere, which is a story that deals with a slave girl and is like a show we see everywhere every year, and decolonizing the Nutcracker, taking away the racial stereotypes in the costuming and all of that, which is work that needs to happen and needs to happen fast and now. But then what is that next step, like you were saying, Caronda, of uncolonizing, and like what are the stories that haven't been told in the ballet canon that need to be told, that are centering different voices, Black voices, other stories that are out there in other genres but maybe haven't shown up in ballet, that we need to do the decolonizing immediately and then work towards the uncolonizing as we go forward.
I mean, I think it's interesting that you just said that, Jane, because I definitely hear you speaking about the artistic practice. I come to the work working alongside organizations as they're trying to assess their operations, get funding, things of that nature, and oftentimes feel like they have to fit in a box in order to be palatable to grant makers that are making decisions about their value. And so for me, when I think about decolonizing, it means not going to those standard definitions that we've come to know as the standard and the preferred way of practice, and thinking about how do we operate in a way that is aligned with our natural way of being, that makes sense to the way that we operate. That does not mean that we are trying to make our art fit into a narrative that is accepted by those that have traditionally, quote unquote, been in power. So I think there's so many ways to kind of unpack this concept artistically and from an organizational operations standpoint, for sure.
Thank you all for that. If you see me take a sip of wine, it's because I'm giving time for our ASL to keep these. It has nothing to do with anything else. So here's that moment. Okay, so Jane brought up something, and I was just like, I got to get it off my chest. So I obviously first started dancing in a very sort of social dance kind of way, reggae, hip movements, what people would describe as more, I guess, I don't know, sexual, sensual, but it's not really that way. And then I was sort of thrust into a very Eurocentric style of dance where I was told that ballet is the foundation of everything. And there are two particular gripes that I had with my training, which was that one thing I was told constantly was, tuck your butt, tuck your butt. I don't have the kind of butt that tucks. Like, that's just where it is. It's going to be out there. And the other issue was like getting prepared to be on stage. My hair is not long enough to go in a nice slick back bun. It's not straight enough to go in a slick back bun. Never had tights that match my complexion. I'm like a dark maple grade A color. Never had shoes that match my complexion, and so always was very like stand out on the stage. And then when you factor in, like you layer in the like stories behind ballet and then what my body is being used to tell, it just always made me feel like I wasn't welcoming in that space. And so I want to ask, like, is there a world in which ballet can be a welcoming place for people of color and people with different body types, people that maybe cannot put on pink shoes or anything like that? I have not yet seen that landscape. I'm wondering if it's even possible for that to exist.
I'd like to lift up the name of Teresa Ruth Howard of Mob Ballet. She is doing an extraordinary amount of work to investigate the barriers that exist in ballet, specifically for Black ballerinas, working with ballet companies around the country to be in dialogue about how their practices make it difficult to be Black in the spaces. And so I guess I can write her name in the chat and the name of her ballet company, because I think the name of her organization, because I think the work that she's doing is phenomenal, and really investigating and inviting the artistic directors to reimagine what it looks like to create and program people of all different races and ethnicities. I'm just going to write this.
Yeah, I can jump in and also want to uplift the work that IABD has been doing, the International Association of Blacks in Dance, led by Denise Saunders Thompson. And they, for the last, I think, 5 years now, have been leading auditions specifically for dancers of color, where everyone in the room is a dancer of color, and then inviting artistic directors from the major ballet companies to sit in that room and select out of that space. Yeah, to your question, TJ, I think there's so many aspects of ballet that need to catch up, not just having more Black dancers in the company, not tokenizing them once they're in the company. Like you just said, even just allowing dancers to wear tights and shoes that match their complexion, which is starting to go become more standard, but also hiring choreographers to create work so that the narratives and the voices that are being shown are different. Kyle Abraham just made a piece for New York City Ballet, and he was the first Black man to create a ballet for them in like 50 years or something like that. That might not be right, but just choreographers, what stories themselves are being told. So it's not just about the bodies on stage. We need to hurry up and do that, but then all the layers that come behind it too, I think.
Yeah, and if I can jump in here to sort of maybe push the conversation or the premise a little further, is this notion that in America, like I don't want to necessarily focus on ballet internationally and especially in European countries, because I think that that's a cultural heritage conversation that is very different than ballet imported into the United States, right? So the notion that American dance organizations, ballet companies, modern companies, artistic organizations, theaters, what have you, have the right to be a primarily white space and a primarily white institution and a primarily white art form is antithetical to what America is. And like that right doesn't exist. So I just want to like pull that back and say, like, even in your question, you're already ceding so much to and already putting yourself in a place of us versus them. And so I like lifting up Teresa Ruth Howard and Mob Ballet. Collage Dance down in Memphis was about to become the largest landholder of a dance facility in the Southeast. Like, if once their capital campaign comes through, they will have the biggest facility, and they're a primarily ballet company. So I think there's this notion of understanding, what it is about that art form that works, and what is it about the way that we're teaching it that needs to be decolonized and deconstructed. But as we build in these new contemporary ballets, can we do that from an uncolonized viewpoint? And can we do that in a way where everyone's stories are respected and are allowed to come in, and all of that flavor is allowed? Like when I think about Creole Giselle as a ballet, like that's an amazing ballet. And like, why isn't that in the rep of a lot of other companies? Like what could we do to make something like that actually translate from all angles? So I want to challenge that notion of like ballet being something that's not accessible to Black folks, because it is, and we've done it really well. And so it's just a matter of being like, okay, we've done this, and we've done it for a very, very long time. So how can we get the respect that is deserved versus being like, I don't belong there,
Yeah, that makes sense. And thank you all for sharing these resources. I was ready to just blow it up. I was ready to just be like, let's get rid of it. let's just not do this shit anymore. So having these resources in this context about the work that is being done is super cool. I want to talk about something that I think is sort of the through line in this, which is about funding. You mentioned, Caronda, how do we get that respect, right? And I feel like funding is a large part of that because it gives you the platform to do the work well. However, in this country, we see most, if not all, of the money going to large ballet companies. I know when I was at the Boston Ballet in 2015, their budget every year was about $36 million. And like the next funded, company in the city of Boston was probably like less than $1 million, right? So that's quite a large gap in funding. Someone has 36 million and somebody else has $1 million, and it only gets less and less there. And there are companies that survive every year off like $10,000, $15,000. And that tends to be where we find all of the flavor, all of the new work, all of the diversity is with these people that have $15,000. So how do we balance this, funding landscape that is so just out of whack right now?
I'll jump in, and then I'll definitely open this up to other people on the panel, because I know that there's some ideas around this. But what I want to share with all of the artists who are listening today and all of the people who are doing the work of creating and protecting the Black cultural heritage and the heritage of the diaspora is that a lot of what needs to shift is not up to you. A lot of what needs to shift is not your work. It is, there are some facts and there's truth. Truth is, when we think about even the Civil War and slavery ending in emancipation, and understanding that slave owners were the ones who got reparations. They were the ones that got paid $300 a slave. The slaves did not, right? So like that mentality and that still exists within philanthropy. When you think of who had the resources to even put the money in a bank, to have it sit in perpetuity and gain wealth off of products that they did not help build, like that money went into things that made them happy, things that continue to further the worldview that these philanthropists wanted to see. And that has continued. And what is happening now is a lot of charities, particularly private foundations, donor advised funds, are recognizing that they have actively disinvested communities and that they are complicit in the system of institutional racism. That is a revelation to some. There's an awakening that's happening. It's like, oh, philanthropy is part of it. Yes, it is. Like, it has actively disinvested in communities. So that's fact number one. Fact number two is the people who are sitting in positions of power within program officer kind of roles, their job is to convince a board of directors to allow them to make grants in a certain way. The majority of program officers in the arts are not versed or well-read or educated or even mildly curious about the African diasporic art forms. They have spent their life at that ballet studio, in that theater class, in that piano class, right? So they have all of this lived experience that reinforces an aesthetic paradigm that is Eurocentric. Then you get a person like me who comes into the space and I'm like, but there's so much more, right? Until there's that level of interest and education on the program officer side to really level themselves up so that they can speak with power to their board to say, okay, I understand why their budget is what it is because they've been actively disinvested. They're in a community within a geographic area that has experienced redlining. And they're presenting an art form that you are not intimately familiar with, but let me tell you why it's fire. Until a program officer can say that with confidence, you're gonna continue to see funds go in a way that is still inequitable. So where you come in as an institution and as an arts organization is to help that education curve, especially in this moment where you say you stand in solidarity with me. Well, this is who I am. Let me help you understand who I am, so that you're not spouting nonsense word salad diatribes about something you read on the internet, right? Like you have a real relationship. And part of that is aesthetics. Animating Democracy with Americans for the Arts has an aesthetic perspective framework that gives people a lens to look at what are the community components, what are all of these different facets besides it's pretty or it's the normal thing to assess aesthetics. So until we really see a shift in rubrics in grant applications, which, by the way, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, moving on, that grant application process is the most insidious form of white supremacy ever created for artists. Dance was never meant to be consumed in the written narrative. So the fact that we're asking people to translate a movement language into a written language in order to get money is grimy. Like, it's just, like, when I thought about it, I was like, whoa, that's a system that has been created. So a lot of the dismantling of that has to come from the industry itself, but you can certainly apply pressure to it by saying, I see you put out a statement. I see you're saying this. I see you're doing that. I'm here. September, October, 6 months from now, what have you done? What are you trying to do? You can ask accountability questions, but at the end of the day, the funders themselves have to shift. And it is happening. It is happening slowly. So apply more pressure. Let's stop.
I mean, to add to what Caronda was saying, I definitely think it's not necessarily the work of the arts organizations to change. And I do know many program officers that are advocating for the things that Caronda described. But the program officers in the scheme of the way philanthropic organizations work they're the baseline. They report to a director that reports to a board often. So even when the program officer knows everything about your organization and is advocating for, I've seen people lose their jobs because they are advocating for those that are traditionally not funded. And while there may be some that are not even doing the advocacy, I'm curious and mostly concerned for those people, the ones who are putting their necks on the line every day, advocating because nobody else will, and literally suffocating trying to do this work. So I think it's both. There's some program officers that don't know anything about aesthetics outside of ballet, and then there are others that do and are actively advocating on others' behalves, but are not heard. And most people think that the way that it works is the program officer has the power. They don't. The program officer is the one that helps to move the paperwork. Maybe they're a liaison between the director and the board, but they're just one step in the process. And I do agree that it's not the arts organization's role to change the mentality but I find myself torn, right? Because many of the directors that I know that sit in these positions are 60 plus. And if they don't know it now, I'm almost like, do they have to die off? Like, is that it? Like, when they retire, will it be the next generation that, like, because I'm not convinced that I can change someone's mind. Or even with all the data, all of the other, I'm about creating our own spaces to fund ourselves. And so that's why I oftentimes push, giving circles, working with investors, people that are outside of the grant making industry, because it is a business that usually benefits off of perpetuating the same narrative, funding the same people. Now, while people are shifting now, in some cases, I think it's being done out of guilt. Like, okay, we can't hide under and rest on our laurels anymore. We have to do this in order to appear to be interested in creating better equity. But I want to acknowledge and raise awareness about program officers that are advocating, because because I know many of them and I know what they've had to deal with, some getting fired, some getting sick off of depression. I just want to acknowledge that they do exist. It's just, how much can they do when the number of them is much fewer than the ones that don't?
Yeah, I want to connect something to that, which is this this concept of when we talk about diversity and inclusion, equity, that is for non-white people or for the group in power, right? And all the data that we have actually points to the exact opposite. There was some data that came out from racial, I think it's the REI, that shows that when you look at how long someone expects to live across multiple countries, the top 30 countries, mostly obviously in the US, when you count all races, is number 26. When you count whites only, it's number 25, right? Like, that's not that much better. Like, you still kind of suck when you're 25 to 30. When you look at birth rates and how, likely it is for a child to, survive birth, the US is 20 out of 30 when you just look at whites, right? And I think that data goes to show that when we look at issues of diversity and inclusion, that it doesn't just serve to help the non-dominant group, that actually these policies and practices hurt everybody. And we see the same thing when you look at gender, right? When you look at gender, you see when you add in more time for moms when they're pregnant, that it actually helps men, right? And this concept is not really thought of when we talk about why we're protesting, what we're asking for. We often, I think, forget that this is for everybody. Like, racism also harms you. Like, practicing only one form of dance that looks a certain way also harms that dominant group. And so I wonder, are there resources or conversations within the dance realm that have talked about this or have this as like a central framework that they talk about, where it's not just about helping X sad poor group over here, but that's this is a worldwide, countrywide sort of, movement.
I couldn't hear your question. I'm so sorry. It's breaking in and out, so I'll wait for someone else to respond.
Yeah, I'll try and rephrase. Can y'all hear me better now?
It's going slightly in and out.
Ah, darn. Okay. Sorry about that. I wonder if I stop my camera, if it'll improve. Is the sound better now? No? Well, why don't I pass it to Jane, perhaps, who can maybe talk about something else while I get my sound and video together.
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll try to reframe the question as I heard it, just thinking about how thinking with an equity lens doesn't just have to be about benefiting one specific population, but that sort of the phrase of the rising tide lifts all boats, that everyone can benefit from looking at it this way. I think for me, yes and no, I guess. I feel that there are, when I think specifically about dance, I'm thinking about genres of dance, that there's a lot of space for celebrating other genres, African diasporic forms, but also culturally specific forms across many different types of dance. And sort of getting away from that paradigm of classical ballet and contemporary dance and then everything else in a bucket, even though everything has its own identity also. Yeah, but at the same time, I do feel like in my experience as a white woman, I don't think I could claim that I, in my dance experience, really suffered any injustices in any way. So I think there's some balance there. I don't know. And also, I just want to throw it back briefly to Caronda's point before about funders. Speaking as a presenter, I also think basically all of the challenges you brought forth to funders can apply to presenters too, that there's a responsibility for us as curators to do research beyond what your audience knows, what your audience pays for, what is popular, what sells, and all of that, and to challenge ourselves in our programs to teach our audiences things they've never seen before, and also to educate ourselves beyond what we've seen, to know everything that's out there, and to put the onus on ourselves to do the work. And yes, I do think in terms of audiences, there's a lot of opportunity to build up new audiences and raise up the success of the dance field overall if we can give more support to a wider array of communities, genres, types of dance, experiences, etc.
Thank you for saving me there, Jane. Is my sound better now?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, I put on some AirPods, not a promo. So yes, that was exactly what I was trying to get at, Jane, was this whole, I forget the phrase you said, I'm sorry what phrase, but the rising tide lifts all boats, right? That this work that we do isn't just for one group of people. It's to impact and change our whole society for the better. And yeah, I was just wondering what, or who's out there talking about the work in this way and doing the work in this way. So yes, thank you. Any other thoughts on that one? All right, I wanna jump to a random question that I have for Nicole, because I was looking at your bio and I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder what dance is like in St. Martin. Can you talk about it a bit? I've never been, obviously, but I'm curious in the context of decolonizing dance, right? Like what is dance like there?
Well, to be completely honest, you know, we have, we're an island that's 37 square miles and we're still a colony. So as we're talking about decolonization, for me, it's very interesting because it's almost like we're talking about something in the past that is affecting the now. But for me, coming from an island that's still colonized by 2 countries, it's very now for me, right? And so we are facing the politics of what that means daily. And so in the means of dance, it's a very intricate conversation because we're not only a very small island that's still colonized, we also have 117 nationalities residing on such a small landmass. So you can only imagine you have all of these nationalities residing on a small island, coming with their own cultures, right? And not necessarily assimilating, but honing into their own. So what is very interesting, it's also very difficult to identify the native culture. Like what is St. Martin culture? What is St. Martin dance? We do have one dance that has been taught to any young girl, any young boy that is engaging in folk and cultural dance, and it's called the Pan Am dance, and it's an emancipation dance. It was a celebration dance that was done after the emancipation of the slaves. So what does that mean? That means that it's not necessarily a dance that's indigenous or from the continent, you know? It's probably a dance that was created, even the movement, aesthetic of the movement had influence of colonization in it, right? So I must say I left St. Martin at 14 years old. My training and my foundation comes from St. Martin. Like yourself in Guyana, you said that you studied folk dance. I was that kid. I did folk dance. I was versed in ballet, modern, and all the various, I would say what we're talking about right now, the more Western, European, Eurocentric form of dance. And then obviously you're in a colony. So in the mind, you're still in colonial mentality. So in the mind, that's what is considered excellence. Whereas the more Afro-centered dances and Afrocentric dances, it has a take of being below that, which is exactly what I'm trying to change with my organization, is that mentality, that colonial mentality, that the folklore and the traditional dances are on some other level less than the elitist Western dances. So I grew up with a range of different dance backgrounds that I'm happy I was able to experience. But what I want to see more is the exploration on how we can romanticize on the African part of ourselves, still being a colony. So my goal during all the programming that I do is I always have African and dance of the diaspora, whether it's Caribbean folklore, whether it's East African dance. We had an artist that came and she's from Uganda. We also had West African dance. I always incorporate some type of singing, drumming. So really invested in bringing the culture home, you know, and really trying to educate the kids too, as they romanticize on the more European forms of art. We have to reclaim the African stance of ourselves and romanticize on Africa in the same light, not erasing what we know, because we've created a culture on what we've known. You know, when you colonize, it's like a new culture is created out of that. You know, and so I want to make sure with the work that I do that we start educating and conditioning the minds of the kids to revisit what it means to be Afro-Caribbean and how beautiful that is, you know?
Yes, I love that. I love that. I think growing up, I was kind of taught that moving your hips was not like appropriate, right? It was sexual, it was sexy. It's meant to be something that you do over there in the dark where no one can see you, right? It's not something that you would put on stage. And even our, like, you know, music styles, it's like, oh, well, anything that has a certain beat is not really meant for the stage. And it took a long time for me to unlearn that. And so I think the more we can help kids to grow up with that mindset already is going to take like 10 years of unlearning off of their plate.
Faith in their minds. And I mean, maybe I'm using a wrong term about romanticizing, but I really mean that.
I love that term.
We have a way of romanticizing on Western culture that you can't believe. It's almost like as a people, we even do it ourselves. It's almost like we try to be, I'm Dutch by nationality, more Dutch than the Dutch, or more French than French. You know, like we are the worst, how you say, pretenders of a form, you know? And so I want to, with the work that I'm doing, my main goal is to bring an awareness and an acceptance of self and really dig deep into the history. Like right now, you're seeing such a big trend of everybody identifying with African Afrobeat. Everybody's down for the trend, but let's not talk about the trend. Let's really dig deep into the culture and understand that when you see that woman winding her waistline, it's not necessarily sexual. It may be sensual, but there's a sacredness of that. And that most dances that are from any type of indigenous culture, there's something that's spiritual too, you know? So we can't disconnect that. And so not to judge Western culture, but when you think on classical dance, how connected is the spirit? You know? And so that is what we're so afraid of. We're so afraid of the spirit. So we're conditioned to learn that spirit is dark. Spirit is demonized in a sense. So you have to keep it real proper. So how do we create dialogue that gets rid of the myth and the whole idea of anything that you don't understand or comprehend is evil or demonized, you know? So for me, this conversation has me very passionate because this is the kind of work I'm doing right now. You know, it's a soul work for me as well as trying to educate the young minds.
Yes, and what you said made me think of the like actual like movements of the forms, and like ballet, there's almost like a rising up against gravity. And with every, you know, cultural form that I've practiced, it's the opposite. We're trying to get down into the ground, right? Down, trying to stay down. And not that one's better than the other, but wouldn't it be nice to be able to have both? To have that sense of being grounded to the earth and also have a practice where you can rise up against gravity, right? But we tend to focus more on that rising up as opposed to the being grounded. And I think that also, as you said, frames sort of how our like spirits work as well. Like, you know, spiritually, we're also kind of far and away as opposed to close and deep into the ground. I think you were going to say something, Allison?
No, that's what I was going to say. So I grew up dancing and singing, but these days when I dance, it's more for spiritual. It's my spiritual work. It is my church. And what I know about the spaces that I occupy in dance, everybody's there for a similar reason. It's the connection, it's the community. And those are the stories that are unique to our art forms that often don't get told through the grant application questions, right? Because they're not being asked the type of questions that would lend you to say these sorts of experiences happen because you exist in this space. So to an earlier point that I think Caronda mentioned around what the grant applications are asking us, I make my work, a part of my work is working with organizations to hone in on what they naturally do, not discredit it, not to put it in a box, but to
Yeah.
actually say, this is what happens because we do our work. And so what happens is, and I've seen it happen, as we are then educating grant makers on what happens because we create our art, they then learn, oh, we're not asking this correctly. How do we expand based on what artists are telling us? Because all they are doing, they're pushing resources. We are creating art. So I would say the most astute grant makers are willing to listen and to acknowledge that what is valuable exists across different art forms, not just in ballet. Because, like I said, for me, this is spiritual work. And so when you think about dance, not just creating, people opportunity for entertainment, but spirituality, healing, connection. And what would happen if we started to tell that story in our grant applications? And then the people that are reading it are like, oh, okay, no wonder we can never figure out how to fund people because we don't even understand that that's what's actually happening. It is I hate to use the word translation, right? But I don't know how many times I've sat with grantees. I've been hired by grant makers to sit with their grantees to talk about what it is they're actually doing. And when they talk, they sound exactly like Nicole. And so then when we start to talk about that, then the grant makers are like, oh, of course we should be funding this. And it's not even, I don't want to, I'm not dismissing the racism because racism exists, but there is the ignorance because we're usually being told stories based on the questions that they're asking. But when we seep into what is really our assets, what makes us unique, then a whole shift happens. And working at the intersection of philanthropy and equity and strategy, I oftentimes am in different rooms and hear different people talking. I'm hearing artists trying to figure out how do we tell our story. I'm hearing grant makers, how do we make it equitable? I hear art service organizations trying to deliver resources. But what I'm saying is artists know who they are. They know. They do it because it comes from who they are, who we are. I'm going to count myself as an artist, even though I'm not practicing now. But it's the richness that happens in what we naturally create that gets lost when we are responding to questions that are like, how many people came to your show? How much money did you raise? When you answer those type of questions, there's no room to talk about the joy that comes, the healing that comes. And so, I mean, without going on a tangent, I just feel like there's so much more room for for us to tell our stories in a way that creates it as assets, not something that's missing. Because it's beautiful.
Can I just say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I know we spoke about it in the previous question, but I want to say, yes, it's a disservice to the white person that does not experience or that is. The question was in regards to, I think it was decolonization and how is the white person affected. They are, even if they are even if they are at an advantage because of what they have access to, they are definitely at a disadvantage for not being able to be exposed to something different.
Mm-hmm.
We can't deny that. We are all of a disadvantage if the world that we live in is not represented. That's the truth.
Yeah, I started out my career as a researcher in dance. So every now and again, when I get very frustrated about what's going on in the world, I try and approach it from a research lens. And so it was the shooting death of the man in Georgia. Can someone please say his name for me because I'm blanking?
Ahmaud Arbery.
Ahmaud Arbery, thank you. I looked up
or Rayshard Brooks.
It was the first one. I'm right. I was very frustrated by this, as I was with many things. And I took the time to look up in the location where his shooters lived. I spent way too much time on this, but I looked up, where are the theaters? What arts programs are offered in the schools? What shows are on those stages? And I'm sure it would not surprise any of you what I found. There's one theater, okay? And the work on stage is all white people. And so no time in this kid's life, I think the boy, the like son who shot him was, I think, no more than like 21 or something. No time in his upbringing did he have any opportunity to come into contact with a Black life that wasn't in this like stereotypical manner. He never saw a Black body on stage, never heard a Black story being told on stage. And not to say that like it's the fault of the arts that this is happening, but it adds a layer into the lives of young people when you can get to age 20.
I think we're losing you.
I think we lost TJ for a moment, but as a native Georgian, if I can sort of jump into that, from rural Georgia, right? So his lived experience is my lived experience. The theater in our town has just reopened, and they're opening with the show that is the like skits from the Carol. Oh gosh, what the lady who does Tarzan, Carol Burnett. Thank you. Sketches from that show, you know, and I know the people who did the sets and are on that, and I can tell you for a fact, I'm pretty positive there's not a single Black actor in this space. And this theater is a historical landmark, and it is a theater that my grandmother had to get a ticket at a side door, go up the stairs, and sit in the balcony if she ever wanted to participate in. Now, I grew up in the, you know, land of where like this was integrated and was part of helping to revitalize this. And my grandmother now has a name on a seat on, you know, stage left, you know, about 3 rows back. And it's a plaque with her name on it, because I understand that she didn't have that experience. And so there is this notion that rural communities are really important. I think is the point that I'm trying to make. The rural experience is just as important as the urban experience. And I want to presence a company like Ballet in Atlanta. And these rural communities rely heavily on field trips. So when they're going to the Woodruff Art Center, if Ballet is not presented by Woodruff or presented in those larger spaces, like that's where you get this ability for cross-cultural exchange. You know, Kenny Leon's company at the Alliance Theater is so important, because those are the spaces that allow rural communities to augment what they're not going to get because of the actual socioeconomic demographics that exist in those places. And I love this notion, Nicole, that you have of like romanticizing and falling in love with who we are. And the more we can create space for people to talk about themselves from that place of like, I am so enamored with what I am doing, right? That's where this can shift. And part of it is the education curriculum in general, like Hello 1619 Project, I'm here for it. You know, that's something that is important. Then it's important to understand that the United States still owns colonies. Like a lot of kids don't know that. A lot of people don't understand that our native countries and territories, they are sovereign. These are sovereign entities within the United States. Like so much of that history is just not understood by the general American. And, you know, the ones of us that grew up in rural America, like, no, like that's not our experience. It's very different. So when we talk about telling these stories, it's important for you, regardless of what the grant application says, is like get to the answer as fast as you can, and then weave that story into as an illustration of why what you said is important. And then once you get in relationship with a funder, have those conversations like, okay, well, what do you need to know about my art form so that you can speak more competently about it? One question that I wished was on every grant application, or even just in the systems where people like create their profiles, like before you even fill out, actually, like I'm new to you and I'm filling out a profile. Like I wish the question said, what does our organization need to know? What do we need to research so that we can understand what you're presenting to us? Like if there was just a space for me to say, you're coming with TAP. I don't know. Here's what I need to read. Tell me about the homework that I need to do. Because ballet companies don't have to do that. Graham companies don't have to do that. Lamone doesn't have to do that. That research has already been done. But if I at least had a space for you to say, tell me what I don't know before you even ask me for money, so much would be just help in the miscommunication. And the same for presenters. You know, for you to go to presenter and be like, okay, you booked me, talk to me a little bit about what you know about what we are, and then you can assess what they really know, if they're just spouting, talking points. And then you can say, oh, as a presenter, I think you really need to read this book, or you really need to know this person. Because when I ask you for X music playing in the house to set the mood, you're not caught off guard by that. And you don't think that this is like a ridiculous request, or when we know that there's going to be movement that might be viewed as controversial, whatever, like, the history of that. So then they can take that to their marketing team and they can talk about it appropriately. Like, it's building in those cultural competencies, which I think can be done in rural spaces and in urban spaces, but urban spaces are so important because when the resources in the rural spaces don't exist, they're looking to these urban centers to fill in those gaps. So if the urban centers don't get it right, like, it's really hard for a rural community that just is not racially diverse to get that content.
Yeah, I love that context. I wish that I would have contacted you when I was Googling like mad to figure out what the context was in this part of Georgia. And yeah, that like urban, like, rural connection totally makes sense. So that was mind opening for me. Thank you. We need to take a break to do an artist spotlight. So let's do that. And I'm going to pass it over to Quinn, I believe.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So I am excited by this conversation because it is so much needed, and I'm over here taking notes and writing in the comments. So thank you guys for having this conversation. I have the honor, and I'm excited to introduce the artist spotlight, who is Molodi. Molodi is a performance ensemble that uses their bodies as instruments, taking body percussion to the extreme. And Molodi pushes the boundaries of stepping through its unique blend of body percussion, gumboot, beatboxing, poetry, hip hop dance, and immersive storytelling, and a robust personality that brings to life a high energy and percussive experience. So please enjoy Molodi.
Hi, my name is Jason Nias, and I'm the director of Molodi. We're a body percussion company that's based in Las Vegas, Nevada. Our mission is to tell rhythmic stories that connect with audiences worldwide. So what you're going to see in this clip is just a sample of one of our pieces that we performed at the 2019 Dance Encore Festival. Hope you enjoy it.
Hello, are we back? Can you hear me? Yes, okay, great. I feel refreshed and a little bit charged after that video. And so my next question is gonna be for Jane. I'm coming for you, Jane. I'm gonna set the context though, because I am gonna come for you, but not for you as an individual, for the institution. But I'm gonna put myself on the spot first. So as I mentioned before, I also work in the tech sector. That means that I tend to work for large companies that are problematic, like Facebook and Bloomberg. However, I feel like the work I do with those companies is amazing and life-changing and changes the world for the better. But I have to reckon with the fact that I'm doing this work in a larger institution where I don't always have control over what they do in other departments, right? I want to still do the work I'm doing, but I'm like wrestling with the fact that I'm doing it within this institution. So Kennedy Center, at least in the arts context, is a big ass institution that does a lot of stuff. And so obviously, Jane, you can't speak for, the entire company, right? But I want to know if that's something that you also struggle with working in such a large company.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Absolutely. I think I will start by uplifting that we have an amazing team in, we call it our social impact team, that does lead the institution in and is at the forefront of a lot of these anti-racist conversations, and has been doing it for years. The team is led by Mark Bamuti Joseph, and they're a team of 6-7 colleagues that are all fantastic to work with. And they have a whole slate of programs that the Kennedy Center has recently actually rolled out a whole new season of our social impact work, and it's amazing. That said, I worry, especially as someone who is a white woman working in a department where half of my work, I'm talking about the ballet side, is also incredibly white, incredibly Western, and has a lot of work to do. And so I think what I am trying to keep front of mind for myself is, how do I not allow all of the work that's happening in social impact be enough for the whole institution? How do I bring it into the conversations my team is having? How do I practice, which is the newest thing I'm practicing, is how do I practice being the loud voice that's challenging my other colleagues in other parts of the institution, the symphony side, the opera side, to not just say, hey, look at social impact, those programs are so great, go us, we rock, and we just don't talk about the rest. We sometimes at the center talk about the grand portfolio. Are you looking at the portfolio of your program versus the portfolio of the entire Kennedy Center? And in my personal belief, the portfolio of each program needs to deal with racism and structural change and diversity and equity, so that we're not only talking about the progress we're making inside the entire umbrella. But like you said, that's my own thinking, and also we have a whole lot.
Yeah, thank you for answering that question. For the folks watching, I sent a list of 10 questions in advance, and that was not on there. So I definitely put you on the spot, Jane. Thank you for sharing what that's like for you. One of the questions that was on the list that is sort of connected to this is, who should critique dance? And I asked that because when you look at a large institution like, Kennedy Center, there are a lot of sort of gatekeepers in that process, right? They're like, you might need an agent first, and that agent has to have a connection to the Kennedy Center. Then that particular person who's in that department of Kennedy Center has to want to talk to your agent about this particular type of work, right? And then there's the whole process that, companies must do to even get an agent in the first place, right? And so there's a lot of gatekeepers in this process, and I don't know, or this is not true, I know for a fact that most of them don't have the expertise to really be critiquing dance. And so I want to know from you all, who do you think should be critiquing dance? What skills should they have? What would their job title be if we were going to narrow it down? And where would you want to place them in this whole landscape?
Can I add another question to the list? When I was thinking about when I saw this question in advance, I was thinking about specifically written dance criticism, like in newspapers and reviews, and thinking about how the value of that has changed even in the last 10 years, just seeing the major newspapers that don't really have full-time critics anymore or have reduced down to one. And maybe a question for the artists is, what is the value of dance criticism now? Do you need a written review of your work to be seen as worthy, or for your work to be valued at the level you're looking to be valued? Or how can we use written dance criticism in other more creative ways to add value that's not just whether or not your show was good in the newspaper?
Can I say something? You know what? I believe that critics should have dance education. Also, an appreciation for the artist and the art, not just a good writer that has opinions. It's not effective, it's not informative, and it's sometimes very opinion-based and very, very left field, you know? And yes, I do believe, and I've seen it because I've been a part of the Broadway community. I've done Broadway, and a critic can break a show, and a critic can make a show. So the critic's opinion is very much valid and has a lot of weight, you know? So I could say in that world for sure, even concert dance, a critic can break and make a show. They can affect the seat being filled, the seats being filled in the theater, you know? So it really matters, the education, the appreciation for the art and the artistry, I think has to be there.
Yeah, I totally agree with Nicole. It's almost like food critics, right? Like food critics have to have a good palate. And if you don't have a good palate, you can't be a food critic. So what are those things that make up the palate, right, of a person? And I really think it has to go one step further. I think there are people that are in those roles currently that have to be willing to say, I am not capable of doing of actually writing about this in a way that is of service to them. Like to have that level of humility to say, wow, I cannot be the person that speaks from this voice, right? And so hopefully, because there are, I want to say, like, there are Black dance critics, like these people, there are Latinx dance critics, there are Asian dance critics, like these people exist, right? And they often have their own blogs where they understand that, you know, trade publications have a different level of sway depending on where you are and what metropolitan area you're in, and that the informal critic, the blog, the you know, YouTube review, like that has shifted some of the power out. I don't even want to say it's shifted. It's created a new realm of power, actually, like that did not exist before. But someone who is in that place, when they're given that assignment, like if they had the humility to say, you know what, I'm not the person. I really am not the person that should be writing about this. Let me go in my Rolodex. Hey, call up. We need a guest feature. We need a guest article. Like if that started to happen more frequently, then I think we would see space made for these guests to become regulars. But, you know, people just, it's really hard to say, I'm not equipped to do that. Like that's a whole nother level of like, that's not my cup of tea, right? Like, so in that realm, I think this is again where artists can start to have those conversations. And when that writing comes out in that space, like you can say, oh, in the comments, oh, but did you know? And then we can encourage people in blog spaces to be like, oh, but here's it from this expertise because their palate is correct. They've cleansed their palate and they know what this flavor should be. So let me help educate you, right? So I think there's a lot of give and take and sort of push and pull that can happen in calling critics up and helping them move up to greatness in a way, because we need all of it. Like we really do need all of it.
Caronda, do you actually have a Rolodex? I have not heard that term in like a decade.
I don't have like a real Rolodex where, You know, I have like
You
I've
did this
seen one,
motion,
and
though.
I actually know someone that has one where it like flips with the cards and it goes, you know, it's really fun.
Yeah.
But you know, we all have digital, right? Like everyone has a roster. Everybody has their network.
Mhm.
And if you are looking around, like here's my challenge, right? Especially for publications that have said we stand in solidarity. Here's my challenge to you. If your publication talking about like large publication has said we stand here, and then now that's trickling down to you and like what you do internally. If you get an assignment, you're like, I'm not the person. And you look through your like Google contacts or your iPhone contacts or your old school Rolodex and you can't find somebody, then you need to pause and say, oh, okay. You need to have a real conversation with yourself about your ability to do your job in this moment. And then if you can't, then that's where you need to go to your supervisor and say, I need help and I need resources to find the right person to be a guest speaker for this. Because we're in this moment right now where people can't keep pretending that you have the delusion of grandeur is just gone. Like you can't just stop. My challenge is stop. Just stop it.
Yeah, I just want to throw in talking about some of those other gates that you're talking about, TJ. Same exact thing on the curator side. I think if more curators could surround themselves with a group of people who could comment on the season they're putting together, or I always think like in dance at the Kennedy Center, we have a team of 3 that Alicia Adams curates contemporary dance with some of our input, and Art, my co-director, Art Praramprin, and I co-curate ballet. And it's really helpful because we don't agree aesthetically on what we like. But if we did agree aesthetically, we would have a bigger problem, because if everyone just says, I loved this, yes, I agree, then you never are challenging yourselves. And same exact thing, Caronda, I think when a curator can say, I don't curate tap because I don't know what good tap looks like. Who can I call? Can I call Quinn and Ryan to evaluate this company and tell me if these people are the real deal? That adds so much value, and we need to be doing that too.
Thank you all for sharing there. And I want to just put a plug out for my circus artists out there. We are talking about dance, but in the past 5 years, I recently got into circus arts. And what I've learned is that just like dance, the genre is very different. So trapeze is different than fabric, is different than lyra, is way different than handstands. Let me tell you, I've tried. And to your point, Nicole, I only know that difference because I've tried those things, and I can tell, my shoulders can tell you the difference between trying to do a handstand and trying to be like, you know, climbing up a rope, right? And so within all of the like movement arts, I hope, I challenge folks to bring that same level of like, you know, rigor that you could bring to music, right? And we do still have challenges in like, you know, music as well, but it seems that folks are more well-versed with theater and music than they are about how to distinguish between things like dance and like, you know, circus art. So putting that out there. And on the topic of people getting more education and training around dance, I want to know from you all, do formalized dance degrees do a disservice to the dance art form? I have a bachelor's in dance studies and philosophy and a master's in dance science and physiology. So as someone with 2 formalized degrees in the you know, subject matter, I'm actually still not quite sure. So I'm hoping that you can all, you know, shed some light on, is it a disservice to have these, you know, formalized degrees, or does it help?
I can personally say for me, I feel like it was beneficial to have an education. I got my BFA at Tisch School of the Arts for Dance, and having to have, I had a great experience there. I had a well-rounded experience there. So to me, in terms of the work that I do now with my organization, I felt like it was completely beneficial. Now I have friends that went to school for engineering, and they end up having careers that surpassed mine. They did not go to institutions for, you know, dance, but they had a love, a desire for dance. They kept dancing while they were in school. They kept up with their dance. And I mean, I have a friend, she went to Howard for engineering, and she danced with me with the company Forces of Nature. She did a lot of commercial projects with me. She also did Fela on Broadway with me, and she have a degree in engineering. So it really depends on the individual, you know, and what you choose to do with the knowledge you have. I always encourage young people to have an education. It's important, it's necessary. Your talent can only get you so far, you know, and not to discredit someone that has chosen the route to just focus on, you know, the craft, like physically, without going into an institution to get formal education. You know, let's say formal education, you know, where you get the dance history, the music composition, the music theory, the dance theory, and these things are important. So I think it varies on the experience you have and the institution that you are in and what those places offer. Because the schools vary, you know, and that would obviously impact the income. I mean, the outcome of your experience and what you're able to do with the knowledge you have. And it has to be also an individual thing as well, I believe, you know, because we could all be getting the same level of education, but what you take from that experience might be completely different. So it varies. It varies.
Yeah.
But I definitely promote having an education.
Yeah, I'm still struggling with that because when I wanted to, you know, study dance, my parents were like,
yeah,
no, that's not right.
And it's
like that's not
you. You need to study something, a real job. You need to get a real job. And even that mentality is what we have to unlearn. You know, we have to start educating our public to understand that this is a real career. This is a real job. So
yes. So yeah, there was that like barrier to like entry where I literally recall doing like a PowerPoint presentation to my family about like why I should be allowed to study this. But then when I came out, at least after my first degree, it was really hard for me to imagine how I was ever going to pay back the money and loans that I took out to get this education. Because even now, as far as I know, in some of the most prominent dance companies, a like principal dancer is making like 50, 60K a year. Like
sometimes,
right? Like, and that's if you're very, very, very lucky and in one of like the top 5, you know, ballet companies. So for everybody else, you're 20K, maybe under, right? So I was struggling, and that's like, you know, one of the things that pushed me into getting a like further degree. So I just got further indoctrinated in this system. So I still struggle with that. Like, was it really worth it? And are there other pathways that I could have taken that I should now be pushing to other young people so that they don't come out of their, you know, 4-year degree wondering like, what the hell, I have to pay back like $100,000 in loans on a dancer salary.
Yeah. But I do believe that the education that you receive brought you to this point. So critical decisions about your career. In my understanding, it prepared you for this moment. That's just what I'm thinking of it. But I understand because I have parents coming to me all the time, especially because the program, I work in finance, by the way. I work in an energy trade and commodities firm. So I have transitioned out of dancing for the past 5 years. So that just goes to show you, and I'm not dropping it like that to say that I'm doing something, anything better. But I'm saying that I feel like the fact that I had an education assisted me in making certain key decisions in my life and prepared me to be in this panel today where I can articulate myself on a certain level. I think these things are necessary. So you can't just rely solely on just the talent. And that is not to discredit someone that has not chosen that part, but that's just to see the other side of it, you know?
I want to pitch a version of this question to you, Allison, because I feel like you kind of do everything. You've kind of done everything. So like in terms of like, you know, training and education, formal and not formal, how did you cultivate the like skill set to be able to both be an artist and be someone who starts a nonprofit and be someone who like, you know, advocates for like, you know, others? Like, how do you bring all that together? You're still on mute.
I think that's a really good question. And as Nicole was talking, I was like, well, first of all, I studied sociology in undergrad, which is the study of human behavior, right? Because for me, at the time, mostly because of what I saw so far, I knew that the way people interact was just knowing how people interact and the politics at play and the power of relationships and power dynamics was just as important for the work that I wanted to end up doing, which is primarily advocacy, right? Like when I think about all the work that I do, it is advocating on behalf of groups, myself included, women of color, people that are historically underfunded. And for me, being able to understand what's at the root of power plays and power, what I call politics and people dynamics was way more important to me than being able to, I wasn't interested in getting an art degree per se, because I wasn't interested in performing on the stage. And while I trained as a dancer and a singer growing up and had an agent and did TV and commercials and all of that when I was younger, I was really like, what's happening behind the scenes? How are those decisions being made? Who are making those decisions? Who's not at the table? And for me, being able to be rooted in theories that by design recognize that there are inequities, me figure out, okay, here's how I put the pieces of the puzzle together. Because as we all know, this is an ecosystem that we're working in. It's not just artists, it's not just presenters, it's not just agents, it's not just managers, it's all of it. And so being able to have a idea of how all those parts play together, it was totally my sociology preparation. And I think when I first heard your question, my immediate answer is I think it depends on what you want to do. Right? Like, so if I wanted to be on a stage, there's no way I'd be like, I'm just studying sociology, right? I would get the dance preparation. I would go to the conservatory if I wanted to do music. But my primary interest was organizational development, how people make decisions, how they implement decisions, how decisions are executed, and what comes into play as those decisions are made. So oftentimes when I do my work, it is just as much about listening into how people naturally interact as it is about my own background and knowledge of what I've seen in my preparation and training. What I didn't mention is that I'm also an evaluator by training, having worked in spaces that create standardized tests, which is a whole nother issue. But like an evaluator by trade listens, investigates, and creates space for reflection. So those sorts of skill sets aren't necessarily the ones that are honed in arts management programs or where you're earning technical skills in dance or theater or music. And I think by design, it made sense for me. And again, it's different for everyone. But what I'd say when most people work with me and they think about the various hats I've worn, they say that it's informed by different, sitting in different seats. And, some of that, I won't say that it was all my sociology degree. It's the power of relationships too, and doing good work wherever you exist, right? So my ability to work in a service organization introduced me to a variety of people that work in so many different aspects of this field, and being able to make quick connections about who works with who doesn't work with who, why it makes it difficult for certain things to pass and others not. All of that takes part into the way that I do the work that I do. And that is all about relationships. It has nothing to do with, I would say, yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, again, it's all about, for me, sorry for that pause, it really is about being able to listen, hear what's being said and unsaid, understand the dynamics that exist on both sides of the spectrum, and then creating strategy that helps push forward a goal. Like when we started Women of Color in the Arts 10 years ago, we were very clear that we needed to have different people on the advisory board that represented different sorts of perspectives about what it meant to be working behind the scenes as arts administrators, because those varied perspectives would inform how we developed our goals, how we developed our outreach, or even when I created an artist fund, we were clear that we were actively trying to push against the traditional philanthropic sector. We didn't want to have a long application with all these questions that never really got to the heart of what it is that you do and why you do it. And we pulled our money together to fund that fund. It was our money that funded someone else, because I knew enough about philanthropy to know here are the barriers. So it's like learning, listening, being astute enough to figure out how relationships work, and being clear about power dynamics. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It's all human behavior for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for that. There's a bit of an echo. Okay, we're better. Caronda, I feel like I have a dirty little secret about the sort of background of what happens in the funding landscape, and I wonder if this is also your experience. But sometimes with foundations and also with private companies, there's this unspoken concept that, for the most part, if I know the program officer, like if we have a relationship, if we're friends, if we're collegiate, if we went to the same school, if we're in the same sorority, like I can submit an application and it's going to get accepted because that person personally knows me. And I find that when I enter new funding landscapes, it's difficult because nobody knows me yet. And I'm like trying to figure out, who do I need to talk to who has the power when I submit this application on behalf of an artist or a company that's going to be like, oh, right, that's TJ, put it through, and is it a secret or is that kind of well known? And is that how you experience the background of the funding landscape to be as well?
Yeah, so I'm gonna my answer might not be satisfying. Let me just start there. And I'm going to start with dropping a phrase that you'll probably hear almost every foundation, private foundation, donor advised fund person say, is that if you know one foundation, you know one foundation, because they all operate and all it's about relationships, and it's about the people that have set up the money and the mission and the reasoning and the priorities and the whatever. So in some foundations, maybe family foundations, sure, that happens. Like I can't sit here and say that it doesn't happen, because it does. Does it mean it's automatic? Absolutely not. In any way, shape, or form, particularly if these organizations, if they have a panel process that you submit and then they have an outside panel that is doing the review and is making recommendations. In that instance, you can say, my personal relationship to them is probably not helping. It's only going to go so far. But that's what the job of a program officer, in that program's team, really is to get in relationship and to break down those barriers. So if questions come and they can't come to you as the applicant, that person can speak for you by proxy. Now, getting that proxy is challenging. It's not something that can't be done, right? It can be done. And part of that is your organization's brand, like the work that you've done to market yourself and the presenting relationships you have and where you're being seen and where you're placing yourself and the work that you're doing to educate community. Part of that is the work that the people on the foundation side are doing to educate themselves. Like that piece, that awakening that's happened is we have more work to do. And it can't be on the artists to tell us everything. We've got to go to them. We've got to seek them out and seek to fill these holes that we have in our application processes. So yeah, I don't want to say it's a dirty little secret, because I don't think it's a secret, right? I actually don't even think that it's a secret. I think that there are some places where and based on the way that their foundation is structured, if you know people, if you've been in a relationship with them, if they are a high touch foundation where you invite them and you have parties at people's penthouses and we're cool, that's the way that they've decided to give out their money. That is not the way that I think that the industry should move. And to talk a little bit about the importance of higher education too is, for me, I started out getting a minor in dance education. That's where the University of Georgia did not have a BFA. It did not exist. So you wanted to study dance, you were learning how to teach in a studio, right? In a competition studio, and that's what you were learning. But for me, I learned how to stomp Marley, and I learned how to do gels, and it was a low stakes place to learn how to actually mount a work and to choreograph. And it became all of these things that I was able to internalize and can now use in my translation skills, like to go back to translating. Because what I do with my work at the Best Socket is I try to position myself for applicants as a filter. So like you can submit what you're going to submit to me, and I'm going to do that culturally competent filter, and I'm going to look for it for translating, because I learned in university how people talk about different art forms. So I already know that. And I know what you're trying to say because you love it and you romanticize it. And like, I feel that too, because I have that lived experience. But I also know that if someone so likes you, then the more they like you, the more likely you are to move up, right? So like I sit in this weird place where I'm like, okay, what are the human pieces? Like, where does humanity come in and sway the process? And I don't think that's a secret, that it does at some point. So for me, like, it's institutions are people with paperwork. That paperwork is very important to creating that relationship, particularly with the organizations that have already bought in and have already invested to you, starting with them. And then asking them, hey, can you do a funders briefing on my behalf? That happens where like funders will get together and they'll get their other funding peers together and say, there's this capital campaign or there's this big project, and we're going to host this for them so that you can, as a peer funder, can just come learn about this organization and ask us questions about how we, pitch the case to our foundation, and maybe the questions that came up and how we answered them, right? Like understanding that those things happen is part of breaking down this sort of good old boy and girl network, and the things that we think are covert and secret is like, oh, that's so taboo. Like I can never leverage my relationship. What do you think people are doing? They're leveraging relationships. Like leverage your relationship, right? It's the same. We have the right to do that just as much as any. We as Black organizations, let me be specific, have the right to do that just as much as any other ethnically based art form, because it happens, and we're worthy of having people talk about us with passion and love just as much as anyone else. So you can't be scared of like asking for someone to vouch for you. But do the work to get in a relationship. So when you're like, hey, can you leverage your street cred? If they're in a position to actually place it, they can do that and do it authentically. So yeah, TJ, it's not a dirty little secret. Everybody knows. Like,
okay. I was just checking. I was just making sure.
Real for some foundations, not everywhere, but it doesn't. Mm-hmm. It's a real thing,
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. We're going to turn to some questions from the folks watching, but I just first want to say that this ASL interpretation is fire. I had other people interpret for me, and it's like so dry, and I'm like, am I that boring? Like, can you get some facial expression in there? And I just feel like you're capturing all of the passion and like energy that we're all sharing. So thank both of you. It's been so amazing to like watch. Okay. Question from the audience. Does the artist have power in decolonizing? And if so, what power do artists have? Who wants to take that one?
I can start. One of the things that kept coming up for me in prepping for this conversation today was the creating new futures work that's being done in the field nationwide. So I just want to uplift that. It is an ongoing process that was started by some artists, Emily Johnson, who's an Indigenous dance creator, Jumatatu Poe, Yanira Castro. So it's a group of artists and administrators who came together to write a document about decolonizing all aspects of dance, the dance field, making it a more sustainable field, acknowledging the need for reparations, and like putting it in this incredible document and then putting it into the world. And that is, to my knowledge, not something that's ever happened before from an artist-led place, serving all of this thinking and discussion to the field at large. And I can say that it has led in the Dance USA Presenters Group, which is a group of nationwide presenters that is primarily old, primarily white, at where we meet, quarterly to talk about things. that document has led to us having breakout discussions about how we fit into that, all the structures that are being discussed. I've seen other nationwide presenters in the Facebook Live conversations that Creating New Futures has hosted. So it really seems to be something that has lit a fire under the field at large, and it started with artists. So I'll try to find a link to drop in the chat so people can connect to that work, but just uplifting that artist-led processes are breaking through and getting to people that need to hear them.
And this might be because I, have an evaluator brain and I'm always thinking about the power of the way questions are phrased. The way the question is phrased infers that artists don't have power. And so I would start by, we do have power, and, recognizing that and starting from there. Artists do have power. Artists are the ones that are leading the way that people think and experience what's happening around the world. Artists are always at the forefront. I mean, I understand what your question is inferring, but I want to invite you to reimagine how you say it and recognize that you have power right from where you sit. And when you start with that and lead with that, then wherever you show up, however you talk about yourself, is led with the idea that I'm already powerful. I'm not coming from a place of deficit. I am powerful just because I exist.
Yes, thank you both for that. I agree and feel strongly like that what you both said is like right. And then there's another part of me that is frustrated when artists are forced into this work. My dad has a PhD in criminal justice. And he definitely knows more than I do about those topics, but we end up engaging on a pretty deep level about some of his work. And I'm only able to do that because of my work in the arts. And the idea that I'm almost as educated as a poli-sci professor through my experience as an artist is super frustrating. That I can name the same data, the same talking points. We watch the same shows, right? Because it affects the arts in such a strong way. And I just wonder if you guys have any, thoughts, resources to bring me down from that place of being frustrated. That why do we have to do everything all the time?
When you say, why do we have to do everything all the time? Can you speak a little bit more about your frustration? What's at the center of your frustration? Is because of the disconnect between poli-sci and dance as valuable?
No. I envision a world where artists can still be educated as much as they want to be about different topics, right? But not forced to do so. I find that we're forced to be uber educated about social justice because we're often being asked to talk about these things. And it's well, why does that need to be a part of my I create work as a Black artist, but do I know what the data is on being a Black artist and what this is what the funding landscape is and all these things? It seems like often artists of color are brought to the table for more than just their art. And sometimes they're not even brought to the table to talk about their art. They're brought to the table to talk about their race or their gender or X number of things. And that to me is frustrating.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, when that happens, make sure you get paid. Just don't do it for free. The world of I'm all for giving, I'm all for educating, but the world of telling people what they could find out on Google is over. So don't do it. Just don't. So, to go back to this idea of the power, to Allison's point, you have power. It is inherently already there, and that is the myth. That is the insidious lie that keeps getting told, is that there's this funding power dynamic between funders and grantees. It exists because we keep playing into it and we keep allowing that to happen. Mm-hmm. So when I think about what happens is when you get in that place where you are invested in, then that's where your work becomes to say, okay, now I've got the money. Now I've got the check. Well, can we have a feedback conversation just like you would call up and can I get these panel comments? This is where you can volunteer some panel comments of like, here's how your application landed for me. Here's how it actually took away from what you were trying to fund because you've already paid me. So now I can be really honest with you in those conversations and like stop sugarcoating things, right? And like say, in this moment, are you guys considering shifting your application? Oh, well, if you are, can I provide you with some things that I wish you asked me? Your application would be an even better experience for me if you asked XYZ, if you gave me space to talk about that. And then in the questions, like when they ask you nonsense questions to answer you might get, a bunch of character count. Answer the question as quickly as you can, as succinctly as you can, and then get to the part where you're leaning into your power and your assets and you're saying all the really great stuff about you that reinforces your answer. Because you're like, I give impact by bloom. Done. Your question was about impact. Here it is. But here's all this other stuff that actually filters up into that. Here's my rationale that isn't necessarily based in data. So yeah, TJ, I mean, that frustration is there, but that's a lot of times because we're ceding to power and we're allowing people to take our choice from us and not remember that we always have choice. You can always choose to show up and what you get into that. And if you have that conversation, and I say with whatever funder it is, you should always ask for feedback, whether or not you get the money. Always ask for feedback. And if they don't want to give you feedback and they don't want to have conversations with you, then that's probably not a funder you want to be in relationship with. Right? Because like if they treat you that way, like how are they going to treat you in the report process? What is that something that you emotionally want to take on to do your work? Maybe not. But if you're in that conversation, like having that conversation about how these things impact us is so important. And it's something that we have to start doing. We're in their hard conversations and they're challenging and they're tricky, but they will lead to a place where hopefully funders will stop and they'll like get it and start leading from a better, posture. But until then, like we can model what that posture should look like. And it's like, if you want to come to me and you want to mine me and my organization because you're not in right relationship with the community or you have a geographic desert and you want to learn about this geography, okay, then, you're inviting me to, you don't have a budget? Well, let me tell you what my fee is. Because I'm not just going to tell you. And we have to be in solidarity as a community, the Black community.
That part.
Solidarity.
Listen, this is what I'm saying. Like, and I feel torn, right? Because I can effectively have these conversations because I quote unquote am not I don't have the burden of relying on the funder for me to do my work. So like I want to clarify for this space, like I understand how difficult it is to be honest with the funder, especially with the funder has like some sort of stake in your future, if that's how you believe, if that's what you believe to be true, right? But I can be the person because I'm not trying to get a grant. I'm not trying to, but to push the envelope. When we had our pre-conversation, I said I was tired because just 2 days ago, I was on the phone with a grant maker who was asking for some expertise for free from a group of BIPOC artists and arts administrators and thought that, well, you're getting buy-in because now you're a part of this committee and it's great. And I was like, absolutely not. You don't come to us asking how to teach you how to design a program. That's problematic by design. At what part do you start to model what it is that you want your grantees to do? And if you don't, you are the problem. Now I could say that because I didn't, and I said for me, absolutely offer money. This is not about money. This is about acknowledging the expertise that you are asking for. Like redesign in your mind what it looks like to meet people on the same page. Like it's just, but I recognize that everyone doesn't have that ability. Everyone's not willing to risk saying something like that for fear of not being in a pipeline for the future. So I think when we're realistic about it, I know Caronda was saying once you get the funding, then investigate what the challenges were. That's one option. Maybe work within the people that you know are advocating. There are people that can speak without any qualms and just walk away and be fine. Like get on some of their radars too, so that they can be the mouthpieces when you can't. Because there are people that are on all sides of this ecosystem trying to advocate for a better tomorrow. and actively working towards it. It's just, who are you talking to? Talk to organizations like Women of Color in the Arts, Arts Administrators of Color, Black Arts Futures Fund. Those are the three that are really committed to the experiences of Black people, Latinx, Asian people. So use your resources. And I just get all, I'm tired of having this conversation. Like, I literally, the other 2 days ago, and then we got off the call and then got an email. All right, we revisited the budget. I told this person, because she said, okay, we're on a shoestring budget. I said, your budget isn't indicative of your priorities. So if you don't prioritize paying people for the expertise that you're asking them to give for free, then you're part of the problem. The follow-up email, 2 hours later, we've revisited our budget. We now have money to da-da-da-da-da. Really? So it's partly being willing to recognize that everything is negotiable. And sometimes that means you might sacrifice, but it's where do you stand on certain things, and what are you willing to lean into or give up? I say this to grant makers and arts organizations. Like, as a grant maker that is spreading out how they spend their money, what are you willing to lean into? Some people might be mad about your new funding stream. Are you okay with that? Or an arts organization that recognizes that a presenter is regularly using them as a marketing ploy to say they program Black people. Are you willing to talk to them about it, recognizing that that might be a risk for you? You have to, and this is what I talk about when standing in your power. When you do it, people will either respond or they won't, but you will absolutely get a response. I just think, I'm sorry, I'm just
Yes.
frustrated.
1000%. I agree with that. I feel like I've been telling people for like the past 10 years, like, don't work for free. And I think now we're finally starting to see some like community and like, you know, sense of, I don't know, we're all doing it. And that's, to me, been the difference in the past year or two, is that when it was just me being like, oh, I'm not gonna do it for free, they just found somebody else. And I was like, well, shit. now I just lost the platform. And now what I'm seeing, which I think is fantastic, is multiple people telling them no, and then giving them a reason why. And then when they still don't do it, what I'm also seeing is people coming out on social media saying so-and-so company is trying to do this. And I feel like that is so powerful, so powerful. And it was something that I was not experiencing 10 years ago. And to see that now, it's just like super encouraging, because it gives me more of a platform, right?
And like, even when I get emails that ask me to sit on a panel for funding up to $250, I'm like, so what about the people under $250? Like, what is available for them? Like, how can you, because if we're real, many of our arts organizations aren't even at the $250 mark. And if the baseline is $250 and we say we want to be equitable, how do we begin to have conversations that speak to that part? And of course, that may mean that in some cases, me saying that is like, oh, here she goes again, which is my crew of friends. We are here they go again, because we're the ones that are always saying these things, but they're always the ones that are like, oh, okay, well, come back a few hours later and it's changed. So it's being willing to say, and like I said, if you can't say it, or if other people aren't willing to be in the amen corner, have someone else that you know will do it. Because at this stage, it's enough. The time is over for acting like you don't know. You're now just being complicit in your ignorance and your racism. Enough.
Yeah, I think Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in that I think something I am actively trying to practice, and that I want to challenge my white colleagues to practice also, is that it doesn't always have to be the Black person in the room who does that speaking up. If I am noticing in the marketing of the Kennedy Center, or if I am noticing that we're not paying people, it's me that needs to do it. And I have gathered myself with a little group of friends so we can like practice the words to use and like practice doing it, because it's scary, but I don't have as much at stake. So more white people need to speak up now.
Absolutely. It's what are you willing to risk for the betterment of the sector? Because we win when there's more diversity of perspectives, dance genres. We don't lose by it. We win. It's, this is for me a micro level of what's happening in this country, right? Like, people are fighting a war with power. And I talked about sociology and the study of human behavior, because it literally is it plays out in the way I see things happen in our sector all the time.
Yeah, I want to also just piggyback on that, Jane, that you mentioned. People in power, or white people, it's, to me, not even taking a risk. I've never seen a white colleague step up and say something and be like punished for it. In fact, what I see when they speak up is that they are praised for it. So there's no risk. I like hear that term often about, oh, take the risk and speak up. You're not risking anything. You're going to get praised. People are going to love you. You're going to be the white savior for the day. And like, take that praise and just like deal with it. But to not speak up, right, is just so problematic in many ways, because there isn't actually any risk for you at all for the most part. Whereas any person of color saying that, there is a huge risk. And then even more so when white men speak up, oh my gosh, it's like, wow, you're the best person in the world, right? And so I do want to put that out there as like, I hope that white folks don't look at this as like, oh, I'm taking a risk and like I have to be afraid to do this thing. It's actually going to benefit you, because people are going to look at you as someone who's willing to speak up on these like, you know, types of issues that they were also probably thinking, right? So yeah. I don't know where we are with time, but I know that there's been a couple of questions in the chat. I want to ask my panelists if they have any topics or comments that I might have missed in the chat that you want to speak to.
Yeah, I just want to sort of jump in on that idea of non-white, non-Black people speaking up in this moment and how important that is. And particularly once venues start to reopen, right? And once proscenium spaces start to reprogram. I think that that is a moment that is going to be very critical for all the non-Black artists, you know, listening to this talk, for all the non-Black funders, for all the non-Black presenters, to really look at what organizations decide to lead with when they come back from being empty. Because I think that's going to be a signal of how the rest of 2021 and into 2022 is going to go. Who are the organizations that these entities, these main large venues, are willing to take a risk on putting on stage to get seen, you know, to get that first wave back? That is going to be, I think that's really important and really key. And then for any, you know, non-Black funder, even all the funders, you know, in this that might be listening, on our side, we really have to have that conversation of, why do we have the 250? Where did the 250 come from? And really dig into it and say, what was the reasoning behind the 250? Most people are going to be like, it was an arbitrary. We just didn't want to, you know, that was the end of where we needed some way to manage volume. So we picked that number, and then it became best practice, right? Well, we know that there's a better practice. So really dig back into that. Like, why does this exist? And is it serving us? Is it actually serving us in our mission, or is it hindering us from achieving our mission? So I just want to say, like, as these seasons start to come out, like, it's going to be so important for non-Black organizations to say, oh, hold up, why does this season look this way? Like, where's so-and-so? Where's so-and-so? And to like call it up from the beginning, because that's going to be a major moment of complicity that's going to show up.
We were so in depth in this conversation that I forgot we are still in the pandemic. It wasn't until you brought that up, Conrhonda, I was like, oh, right, yes, theaters are closed, nothing is happening. So thank you for that context, because that is the world that we're going to be moving back into. I want to question. I don't know what this is going to come out like, but here we go. I often question, especially when it comes to dance, which is a nonverbal art form for the most part, who are presenters actually presenting for? Because at least in the US and in most major cities in the US, we're not 25% people of color. Yet on a good day, that's what you're seeing in a season is, 25% of the work is non-white. I know when I was living in Boston, it was like 53% people of color. In most other major cities, white people are not the majority. And then when you look at other factors, gender, for example, I think 20% of people have some sort of some sort of disability, for example. 20%. Yet I think we see 1% of the work in the sector that's not like able-bodied work. Another like 30% of people are like immigrants. Another 40% speak a foreign language, mostly Spanish. So who are we making work for? And why is it so far off from where we are in terms of what our country actually looks like? Did I break the conversation?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm gonna, maybe this is a cop-out. I want to add another question to the pile, which is like, I think the short answer to your question is most presenters are saying we present for our audience and the artists, but we have to be beholden to the audience because they're the ones that buy tickets and bring them in. But I guess my question and the thing that it feels slow going in my work and that I would like to speed up is the question of like, this audience that you are programming for is the audience that has been your audience for 30 years, 50 years, whatever. What is the audience of the future that you don't even know who they are, where they are, that certainly hasn't bought a ticket because you haven't shown them that they have any desire to be in your audience? How are you getting to them? How are you taking your audience to that place so you don't just cleave off everyone who's ever bought a ticket in the past? But how does a presenter have a responsibility to bring our audiences along to the future? And how does that work find us new audience that has no interest in engaging and shouldn't have any interest in engaging because we're not doing anything for them?
I'm a little confused. I'm sorry. So the question was, how do we get presenters to present more than just 25% Black people or something like that, right?
Yeah, I'm just curious as to why there's such a great dissonance between the data that shows we're in a super, super diverse country when it comes to several factors: race, gender, language, religion, right? But I don't see any of that for the most part represented on stage. And I'm just wondering why it's such a huge discrepancy.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Racism and capitalism.
Okay. 3-word answer. Yep, that's fair. But those are big things to unpack. Is the trouble, right? Short answer, long solution. Yeah, but I feel like we see more success in like the TV shows like World of Dance, and So You Think You Can Dance. Like a lot of young people watch that. A lot of diverse people watch that of all different backgrounds. So what are we missing? And I think that those spaces also have their own issues when it comes to racism and capitalism, right? So what are we missing that, or I don't know, is it just like two different realms, totally, or are they actually doing something right that maybe we can start to pick up on in the sort of concert dance realm?
Well, I'm just going to jump in here. So those two shows that you mentioned, World of Dance and So You Think You Can Dance, are on network television. People don't have to pay to watch that. It comes on the air, if you have rabbit ears or a DTV antenna, you get it for free. So I think there's a difference when you're talking about something that is a commodity that people have to actually pay for with their discretionary income. I can just turn on my TV to NBC and see one of those two shows and log in and use my cell phone, right? The level of engagement and the level of actually like investing in television programming is very, very, very different. And I personally see them as two different, like it is a genre, is dance for film that has created its own separate thing as an offshoot of the competition dance sector, which like we haven't even talked about competition dance, which is like the land that I come from. That is a whole nother, realm of nonsense, in some cases. So yeah, I mean, like you have to think about the level of discretionary income that you have to pay into to participate in the two different venues.
I do agree with you in terms of it's two separate, but I must say when you mentioned concert dance before and you mentioned competition dance, I see competition dance having more of that commercial appeal where they are the ones that are on the so you can think you can dance and I feel like that platform has benefits obviously because it's opening the eyes of people that may not be the ones that are going into the theaters and buying a ticket to sit in a theater. So it does a good service of educating people. Dancers have now become household names because these reality shows, for lack of a better genre to call it, exists. But I feel like it almost is like, and I don't know if I'm saying this in the wrong light, but it's almost like video killed the radio star. It's almost like, now you have all this contortionism, these tricks, and it wows the average eye that have never seen concert dance. So now when you expect to see dance in the theater and you see, so you think you can dance, you're thinking you're going in to see, all these tricks and the subtleties of, let's say, contemporary dance, modern dance, concert-based dance. You don't always get that on live stage. So it's kind of like a very showtime, and it's almost like there's not the connection between the person watching as an audience member watching that show. It's like being performed for television, as you say. So the artist is then performing for television. So you're not getting the kind of connection that you're going to get sitting in a theater live watching an artist on stage executing a ballet or a concert dance piece. Saying this to say that I feel like there's pros and cons to that, to having dance now be so commercialized and so available. But I do see that it's also very beneficial in having that kind of platform for the average person to now be able to be exposed to dance on that level.
Yes, thank you for that. And thank you for that context of that we do sort of see it as two separate realms, and that thought of like, okay, you actually have to pay for this is a different point of, entry for like, concert dance. So helpful context. Thank you. I'm reframing and reforming all the things in my mind based on this conversation. So thank you all so much. Thank you to our interpreters.
You're decolonizing your mind, TJ.
Yes!
You're decolonizing.
Oh my gosh. Every day my mind is becoming more and more decolonized, and it is a wonderful feeling. Okay, I am going to pass it back to Quinn, who I think is going to give us our closing remarks.
Thank you guys for having this conversation. It is really, it's really helping me. I'm sitting here just thinking about, we're talking about decolonizing dance, and St. Martin is still colonized, and all of the levels that go into that, and it's huge, and it's bigger than this conversation, which I hope will continue on past our experience right now. And thinking about decolonizing the mind and all of the focus on decolonizing that's happening in the US and the protests that have been happening, I am wondering, what would you put on your protest t-shirt? Phrase, word, anybody can jump in. Whenever you're ready, what would you put on your protest t-shirt? Go ahead.
I have two phrases.
Okay.
Changing perspective, shifting the consciousness.
Nice. Okay.
And then I have one that's I am here, and I am worthy.
That's good. Who else? Everybody gets a protest t-shirt.
I think I'll just share my mantra for the week, month, season, which it would just say vote, 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 maybe like 10,000 times down the shirt. Vote.
Okay.
Just vote.
I love that. Mine would be the actual what I wrote on my sign, which says "Stop stealing my rhythm and looting my blues."
Ooh. Okay. I'm not mad at that at all. You might want to, put a little copyright on that. TJ, what would be on yours?
Oh gosh, this is tricky. I hate crowds. So protests are really not for me. So mine would say, I don't really want to be here either, but y'all be tripping. So I have to show up.
Okay. I dig that. And as I said before, like this is just the beginning of more dialogue and more action. And I hope that this conversation has inspired you to speak with your funders and potential funders and to hold them accountable, as Caronda was mentioning, and really light a fire under them to be what they say they're going to be and do the things that they say they're going to do. I want to say thank you to TJ, Caronda, Allison, Jane, and Nicole for being with us tonight. And thank you to everyone who has been watching. Also want to say thank you to our ASL interpreters through TRJ Bridges. And we hope to find more opportunities and space for continued discussion in the future. So be sure to stay tuned to all that Soul Define is doing, as well as all that Dance Place is doing, as well as these amazing people that are on this panel. Follow them, see the work that they're doing, and be in the community. Good night, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, guys.